Hi, I'm Anya, also known as Meppity, and today's video is about how my friends and I created the animated short film, Warm Welcome. This video will contain a detailed breakdown of every step, as well as reflections and general thoughts about filmmaking. So whether you're looking to work on group projects, go solo, or just want to know what I've been up to for the last 2 months, this is the video for you. Each section has been time-stamped in the description and should be neatly segmented in the play bar. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to first watch Warm Welcome. It's currently in the top right corner of your screen and linked in the description. It's only a minute long. To add context, all of us that worked in this are CalArts character animation students, but we're currently taking a year off school. Some of us were looking towards participating in the CalArts virtual Halloween event, and eventually we decided to team up and work on one larger project together. I did not do this film alone, so today I've invited my friends to talk about their contributions. Don't forget to check out the links in the description. Each of them are insanely talented, and without them, our little film wouldn't have existed. I must quickly warn you though that the audio quality might be spotty because we all use different devices to record ourselves. Without further ado, say hi to my awesome teammates.
Hey there, my name is Balashov. I was the co-director, producer, and compositor on this film. I also picked up various jobs here and there, such as coloring the animation and doing the sound design.
Hello, I am Janelle. I mainly help with animation, background painting, and some compositing on this film.
Hi, my name is Michelle. For this project, I worked on the character design for Flamey and did a bit of visual development.
Hello, my name is Moiza, but online I go by Mui. I was the prop designer and color keyist for our film.
Hi, I'm Izabella. I'm the layout artist as well as a backup animator.
I'm Kamau, and I was a guest animator on the film Warm Welcome.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
What's up, y'all?
Now that we're
all
being
here.
recorded, I don't know how to talk.
Yeah,
Wait,
definitely
isn't
not
Jasper
like
supposed to be
this.
here?
Okay, so I guess we'll get straight into the questions, which, let's start at the very beginning of this whole entire journey. We had our first meeting to brainstorm ideas and kind of plan the rest of this journey. And what was that first meeting like?
We went through like a bunch of like different concepts and like the tone that we wanted to go for. Like, I think we were talking about having like a sort of spooky Halloween intro. And then we tossed that idea out. And what other ideas were there?
Well, we knew that the Halloween theme for CalArts was underwater, and so for a while we were like, let's do watery stuff.
That didn't happen at all.
No, but
We
the
went in
opposite.
complete opposite direction, yeah. Well, I don't have regrets about that.
Me neither.
Yeah, I'm happy with what we did.
I just want to quickly give Anya credit. She was the first one to come up with the idea of a flame answering the door. So it was like one of the last things that was suggested, but we all like loved it immediately and really started to latch onto that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, if I remember correctly, we had around a 2-hour call that first week.
It was so long.
And we were talking for an hour and a half, coming up with all these ideas, and it only was that 1.5 hour in when we finally came up with this flamey idea, and we immediately just decided to run with it. We still had a few things to iron out before we really got started with the project, and one of those was technical limitations. Yeah, so does anyone want to talk about that?
Well, okay. So we were on a timeline, that was very specific because we had to get it done by Halloween, which gave us, I think, about 7 weeks at that point. So it couldn't be very complicated or long because we had to finish it in time.
Z was the one to come up with that very detailed breakdown of all the production schedules.
Yeah.
Just in general, without Z, I don't know how we would have done this film, so everybody say thank you, Z.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really admire your organization skills.
Mm-hmm.
As do I.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.
You already knew that.
Deeply envious. So going back to those technical limitations, one of the things we decided was the video should be no more than 20 seconds long. Well, that changed. We also said no crazy camera moves, and the story needs to be really simple. And I think we stuck to most of our initial parameters, except for the 20-second long one. Yeah, that
doubled.
we tripled the length of our animation.
We had so many ideas, and even a bunch of them got cut. Like little gags with the fire or like more ways, but it's still like we kept the essence of it, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of which, how do you guys feel like the tone of the film changed much from our initial ideas?
I think like we all like said like, yeah, let's keep it lighthearted, but with a little twist at the end.
Definitely. I think initial passes of ideas had a much more comedic element to them, which wasn't necessarily what we were going for. We wanted something, as you said, lighthearted, cheerful, but not clowning or physical comedy so much.
One of the early ideas was Anya's, and we were gonna have like the flame pass by a portrait and light like the hair on fire on the portrait, and it was gonna like maybe fall to the ground, so like on a rewatch you might imply how the fire spread even further from like different elements like lighting on fire like that, or more obviously.
We still have remnants of some of the other ideas, like with the jack-o'-lantern or pumpkins. Another thing we wanted was when Flamey falls, rather than just falling into the one pumpkin you see, he was going to fall into a series of them, all with different facial expressions. It ended up being too complicated, and we didn't have enough time, both as a group and also within the film. So we scrapped that, but we still kept the pumpkin travel element.
I think we almost included, but then we realized with the goal of 20 seconds that it would not work, but we almost included like going through a lab or something and interacting with different chemicals to like turn different colors, but that later got combined to be when it touches the candy, it turns into the different colors.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so early on.
Okay, moving on. We're still on the first meeting. One other thing we needed to do was role assignment. And how did we go about that? I honestly don't remember.
Me neither.
I think we talked about like each other's like strengths and weaknesses.
Well, what I remember is that during the first week, like we could just do whatever we wanted and come up with any designs we wanted. And after we met after that, we looked through everything we had and kind of assigned roles based on what people were producing. For instance, I immediately started doing character designs and was ultimately assigned that. Some people who kind of did more exploration with the environment eventually were like, you know, their roles were reflective of that.
Just to wrap that up, so some of us were working on other projects and had varying schedules, so the other thing we had to consider when assigning roles was when are we available to do that. For example, if you're only available in the second half, there's no point in you doing character design because we need that right at the start of the project, blah blah blah.
So I was the producer on this project, which basically means that I was in charge of all of the organization, from what people had to do from week to week, to where we were at in the film, to, you know, making sure we had all of our files in the right spot. There was definitely a lot to keep track of.
It's definitely very different making a film in a group versus making one yourself. You have to think about things you never thought you'd have to think about, like how do you name your files? How do you keep that naming system consistent between everyone? Like it just, the smallest details that usually are straightforward suddenly become overly complicated.
Like in a group project, it's much more than just like creating the art yourself. It's also a lot of Google Docs, like.
If you want tips for organizing a project like this, my two biggest suggestions would be 1, spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are like gold, like chef's kiss. They are the pinnacle of organization, and I will die on this hill. I love spreadsheets. At the very beginning of the process, I started us off with a spreadsheet detailing the production schedule, which basically was like, okay, week 1, we want to figure out a script. Week 2, we want to have storyboards, and so on and so forth. And what made it really nice about being a spreadsheet is that whenever someone finished something, they could check it off and everyone knew it was done, and we can move on to the next stage. It really helped keep everyone on the same page in terms of where the project was at. Second, just check in on people. Every week we had meeting calls kind of going over how things were going, where the project was at, what everyone needed to do. And then throughout the week as well, I would check in and be like, hey, is this shot done yet? Or, hi, how's that background going? And let me know if you need any help. That kind of thing. Also, giving people clearly delineated assignments to do. Like, I would write out homework for everyone every week. I don't know, people said that was helpful, so. What really helped me during this process is I did an internship earlier this summer where I worked directly under the producer of an animated TV series, and I got to see, how a TV show was put together in like an actual studio environment, and basically I did all the spreadsheets for them. So it was kind of mundane work, but it was really helpful in, understanding how to put together a short animated film with a group of people, because that's not something I had done before. Because at CalArts, everyone makes their own animated film each year, and it's a fantastic way to learn, but it's not quite reflective of how things work in the actual industry, where you'll be working with large groups of people.
For us, what was really helpful was we did a lot of like concept art and figured out the look of the film and put together a pipeline test. And so by the time we actually started working on the film itself, we had a really clear idea of what we wanted it to look like, and we knew what it was going to look like in the end. So even if it was messy at various stages, we knew where we were headed with it.
So Anya and I co-directed on this project, which is fairly common in animation, actually, to have co-directors. It was very helpful as well. It's very nice having someone to lean on in terms of creative decisions, or if, by the time we were getting towards the end of the film and I got really caught up in compositing, Anya kind of shouldered some of the more directing work, which was really nice. The biggest difference between a producer and a director is that a producer is focused more on the people and the structure of a project, schedules, the budget, the scope, that kind of thing. The director is the one focusing on the creative aspects. The director is the person who has the creative vision for a project and leads everyone towards that creative vision. I think directing is really fun because you get to kind of get your hands on every single part of the animation process instead of having to focus in on one aspect of the pipeline. I'm really interested in kind of that holistic view of a project. I like being able to get my hands on every single part of the process of an animated film. When people ask me what part of the animation process I like most, do you like visual development? Do you like story? Do you like animation? It's always really hard for me to give an answer because I kind of am interested in a little bit of everything. And that's why I'm drawn towards directing, because you get to be part of every step of the process.
After getting a vague idea of the story and our main characters, our next step is storyboards. Almost everyone contributed to this part, but primarily was made by Janelle, Z, and myself. I focused on the beginning and end of the story, Janelle worked in the middle, and Z filled the gaps and tinkered with the overarching piece. Storyboards are a series of images that break down how the story unfolds, shot by shot. Storyboards often include information such as composition, action, camera angles, camera moves, and dialogue. It's really the first glimpse of how a film is going to be structured and is vital to the clarity and continuity of a story. Get this step wrong, and the rest of your film will suffer as a consequence.
I'm actually pretty proud of our film, so there's not much that I would have changed. I guess one thing I could have done better would be to clean up my storyboards a little bit, so that in latter part, we wouldn't have to redo as many shots.
I think we can all say that the middle section of the film for a long time caused a lot of confusion, but I feel like we all pretended to know what was going on for too long, and so we didn't realize that everybody was confused. So that's more proof that if you're confused or if you have questions, just ask. It doesn't matter which role you're in. Say you have nothing to do with story, it's still worth asking the question because you're still going to be a viewer of this at the end of the day.
We did our storyboards in Procreate and Photoshop, but also Toon Boom Storyboard Pro. This is a software designed specifically for boards and animatics. After boards, we moved on to the animatic. Z was in charge of this. An animatic is essentially a slightly more detailed, timed version of the storyboards, and is what animators get sent to work with. Depending on the nature of a project, animatics have varying levels of accuracy. Small projects like ours can be looser, but when a studio outsources to places like South Korea, India, or Canada, it's helpful to have solid boards and on-model characters to ensure nothing gets lost in translation.
Yeah, it's really nice to have accurate character designs and portray the emotion that you're aiming for in your boards and animatics, because when the animatic is sent to the animators, they'll most often copy the designs that are in the boards, sometimes to the T. And if the motion or emotion is not clear, then the animator might take the scene in a way that wasn't intended. One thing I wish I could have done differently was, if the boards aren't clear enough for me to go off of, that I should ask, right? It seems pretty obvious, but like, if you don't, you might have to redo shots.
So in terms of how I came up with this design, our character is made of fire, and fire as a substance is very volatile, very spontaneous, and I wanted my approach to reflect that. I remember that when we were discussing Flamey's personality and the plot for our film, I had this itch to draw, and as soon as the call ended, I started doing these really, really quick gestures just to get how I felt about the character out there. The final design was actually based on the second or third sketch I ever did, and I now realize that when I stopped doing gestures, when I slowed down and started to think more about my drawings, they grew more stiff, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just wasn't what we were going for. Ultimately, despite all my efforts, we stuck with the simplest because it would be the easiest to animate. The detail I indulged in didn't significantly add to the character or story, and you have to remember that someone will eventually have to animate this, and it's a good idea not to kill their hands. Simply put, this design is the best balance between aesthetics and function. It also got me thinking, out of all these designs, why was this one so effective and why did it stick out? One reason is that it has a smile, and a pretty big one. It's not necessarily the coolest looking character, but it's the one you emotionally connect with. Expression is important in creating appeal, and a note to my future self, do not neglect that. What also helped keep things consistent, especially when we each have our own way of drawing, was assigning one person to do everything within a category. For instance, I was in charge of character design for Flamey, and I did not touch the designs for the kids at all. That was Anya's responsibility. Izabella did the layouts and lines for all the backgrounds, while Janelle painted them. That way we reduce, for lack of a better word, cross-contamination.
I designed the human characters in this short, and if you haven't already figured out with our avatars, they're self-inserts. This proved an interesting challenge because I had to try and capture the likeness of everyone on the team, as well as create costumes that felt believable to who we are and the world our characters are in. Michelle already covered a lot of important aspects of character design, but I also want to touch on the role from a more functional perspective. Our designs get sent to the animators to ensure everything is consistently on model. This is where turnarounds and pose sheets are vital. Turnarounds show characters at multiple angles and also how they work as solid forms. I also created a lineup with flat color to establish height comparisons and to give colorists a palette to work with. It's useful to provide pose and expression sheets for any unusual or special poses, but because the action was fairly minimal, I didn't feel the need to provide one, entrusting Janelle with the character acting in the final shot.
When designing for animation, it's really important to design for motion. For example, how it transforms as the story progresses, as well as how elastic or rigid their body is, and you can communicate that in your pose or expression sheet. So to help me come up with my poses, I took a look at fire references. I studied how it moves, as well as how it changes as it grows from, say, a tiny candle flame to a big fire. Overall, I still didn't want to depend too heavily on realistic references because normally when I do, I find that a lot of that instinctual personal vision is lost.
Sometimes we couldn't all attend meetings, and so we would write up like a meeting agenda, add notes in there.
And 1 week I wasn't able to come, but I needed to know what costumes people wanted to be dressed as, seeing as I was designing the characters. And I think,
my god.
I think some some goofing happened, some practical jokes where people were changing each other's costume ideas in the in this document, and my little brain did not process that these are jokes. So on screen is my initial design of Z dressed as an entire shoe.
To explain though, Z's constantly wearing iconic platforms, so like this didn't seem that out of the ordinary.
I just completely adopted it. I gave everybody 4 options, and 2 of the options, one said in Z's thing was a shoe, and then the other one said the other shoe, and I was like, well, I guess Z wants to be a shoe then. And bless, when I showed it to everybody in the following meeting, everyone was like, yay, I like my design, and Z was eerily quiet and mildly confused.
Gotta admit, that was a pretty bomb design.
It was cool. I was impressed, but also I was like, what happened?
A prop designer's job is to design the objects that our characters will interact with. In the case of this film, I worked mainly in the hallway and designed the candle and the sconces. This isn't always the case, but for this particular film, I worked primarily in silhouette because our final style goal was very shape-based and simple. When designing the candle, I explored variation in height and width and tried to keep in mind the balance of having big, medium, and small sections for visual interest. The candle would have to complement Flamey. It was his home.
But wait a minute, wasn't only the top of your candle seen in the final film? The simple answer to that is yes. By the time the animatic was finalized, we made the filmmaking choices that led us to never show the candle in full. Such is the way of filmmaking. Things get cut. It happens. I still had a lot of fun experimenting with proportions, learned a lot, and used what I learned from here in my sconce designing next.
When designing the sconces, my thought process was very similar. Here are some variations I did. Again, all silhouette. The biggest question, though, was deciding between double or single sconces, and if we wanted to try using mirrors, because that could complicate the animation process later. We had to decide how fancy to go.
So I had a few roles in this project. My main role was layout artist, as I said, where basically I had to do the rough backgrounds, and I had to figure that out from looking at the storyboards and talking with everybody else to figure out like all the interior layouts, the furniture, the designs, the set pieces, all of that. And basically I did have other work besides that. I did do some animation for the trick-or-treaters, and I also colored one shot, but mainly the layouts was my role and focus for this. So for the design of the layouts, this was something that we discussed as a group during our first few meetings, and our main influences were old vintage Halloween illustrations of old manors and haunted houses, as well as looking at some of the concept art for Coraline and how they designed the house for that. As well as Anya's own house. She provided some of the layouts just to help figure out some of the perspective and camera works. I don't know why, but for the longest time, I thought the first shot would take place in like a separate living room. And so like all the layouts I did and like my whole brain process was like, okay, we're gonna start here and then we're gonna jump to the hallway. But you guys like clearly made like the statement that like, okay, we're gonna start on a table in the hallway. But my brain, for the life of me, was like, no, we're doing this.
I didn't even realize you had that problem.
No, neither.
A color script defines and guides the colors and lighting of the entire film. This was like my dream job, so I'm really excited to talk about this. Ideally, a color script will make a cohesive color flow that amplifies the mood and emotions of the story. Once again, story is king. Everything should support the story. When I started, my first task was compiling frames from the animatic and laying them out in what was roughly a grid to get a sense of the flow. But now that I think about it, I was actually kind of reverse engineering our animatic back into a storyboard. But as Izabella was finishing her layouts, I pasted those in and got a more accurate sense of the background, so things were starting to really come together. Then, I thought about value. So in complete grayscale, I determined the flow between light and dark sections of the film. This was subject to change as I worked, but it was really useful in laying the groundwork for the colors that I would later pick. My overall goal was for this film to stay mostly dark, and then grow to be a more vibrant, bright, and contrasty thing as the energy built, with a final, more stark mood shift with the fiery reveal. When brainstorming the colors I wanted to use, I tried to balance warm and cool tones. For example, in the first shots, I felt right away that our big house should have a reddish-brown hue. It felt grand and rustic. And the outside, where Flamey would be headed, should be a pale blue in contrast. I figured in my head that Flamey's light golden yellow that Michelle designed would fit really well against both of those colors. But before I even went in and colored a frame of my value key, I made a gradient to see that color palette altogether. After I determined that I liked it, with an overlay layer, I began to color over the first shot of the value key. However, despite that first frame working to my satisfaction, I knew I needed to plan a little bit more before diving into the rest of the color key so that the whole thing would feel more cohesive. I wanted each location to have its own feel and primary color, but still connect and blend together. We had 3 main locations to determine. 2 of them were already kind of figured out from just the very first shot that I had done. The hall main color was going to be that burnt sienna-ish brown. The foyer was going to be a light blue, like I determined with the lighting, so thinking between and from those colors, I came up with this new gradient here. For the final shots, I knew we were going for a dramatic mood shift, and this was a new segment. I wanted it to feel different from the foyer, but it's still connected, so I took the blue and made it deeper and darker. It was like a puzzle. It fell into place. And voila! Here's the final color key. As you may notice, some of these shots are different from the final, because a lot changed in the midsection with the candy. The color key was also ever evolving throughout the process and how we learned to composite, so things changed, but I think in the end it became a really strong, cohesive flow of color. I just want to make sure that I thank Michelle. The color key would definitely not be what it is without her help. She helped me immensely, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Pipeline tests are clips finished from beginning to end in the style of the final film. It is a test to see how we can achieve the visual style, how many steps are there in the process, what needs to be hand-drawn versus composited, and to generally sort out any problems that might arrive. It is so important because we all want to figure out the major obstacles before we embargo onto the film itself. In addition, it helps to streamline everyone's responsibility in a group setting.
Janelle did some really sick pipeline tests that I'm sure have either been shown already or can be shown right now as we're talking about it.
There is one wonderful pipeline test, but I'm not showing it because I'm mildly superstitious. So,
sorry.
To explain to you guys what you're missing out on, we needed a house burning pipeline test. And Janelle decided to use my house as the model. So she animated my house on fire. That will not be, your eyes will not lay upon that because I don't want that to happen to my actual house. But it was beautiful, I can reassure you.
I think the funniest part was when Janelle first sent it and we were all like, wow, that looks sick. And then even Anya was like, wow, that's sick. And then minutes later, you were like, wait, that's my house. And we all just had a moment. Anya looking at a burning house. This feels
we were joking in earlier meetings that we would use Anya's house as reference, so it's you know what, might as well follow all the way through. And there we are.
You sure as hell did.
Another thing that's really useful to make when you're working in a big group is a style guide to consolidate the look and feel of your entire production. We started on one, but I don't think we ever finished it. Instead, what we did do was define some images here and there that we'd constantly refer back to when drawing.
We also were really inspired by those Annecy shorts. We just wanted to be like something really pretty but really nice and short.
Yeah, what was the name of the specific short we were using as reference?
Un diable dans la poche. I don't know how you would pronounce it in English. I don't think there's a good way to say it.
A devil in the pocket.
Oh, that's true.
Diable.
Thank you for translating.
Wonderful. Yeah, so if you guys haven't seen that, that was done by Gobelins. How do you pronounce that school?
Gobelins.
Gobelins. French animation school, absolute masters over there.
They team up with CalArts sometimes.
Yeah, we do like an exchange thing, and they seem very cool across the pond, except they're on the same side of the pond as me, but we'll ignore that temporarily. The style that had was very clean, but also these fadey, fuzzy edges on like half of the shapes.
The backgrounds for film is different to regular illustrations. It in itself is not a complete piece of artwork without the character. And because the main subject of the film is the character, the purpose of the background is to support rather than steal attention away from the character. And another thing to keep in mind is that like each background needs to hook up with the one previous and after. This is where the importance of the color script comes in. It determines the brightness, saturation, hue of the whole film so that no background jumps out from the rest of the set.
So my favorite part of the process was showing my friends the work that I've done and getting their response and feedback on it, as well as seeing like how they only added on to it and made it better. Because what I essentially did was just the skeleton sketch, and so we'd have another person color that in and make it the final background, and then of course people would animate on top of that and it'd become its final product.
My favorite part of the process is definitely roughing out the scenes, because just seeing your drawings move is just the best feeling in the world.
During rough animation, we just sign up for the shots that we wanted to do. Each person is handling about 4 to 5 shots, depending on the difficulty of the shots. Each person is different in how they approach animation. Some people like to do several passes, while others can jump straight to clean up after one pass. The focus of each shot is quite different. There are shots that required more acting, so it was better to approach it pose to pose. Meanwhile, the more action-y ones can be done in straight ahead, since it's mostly mechanics. I can only speak for myself, since I don't know how others approach this. But for me, usually during my first pass, I would focus on basic proportion, acting, and rough keys timing. And after that, I will add the fire effects and the in-betweens. For our project, we animated with Toon Boom, Harmony, and TV Paint.
I'd say joining the production later was a little bit difficult.
I remember I tried learning the story through it's like looking at the boards, and I didn't get like the emotional beats correct, or the motion that Flamey was going. Like my brain was a bit off from everybody else, and everybody else knew what was going on, and I was just like just doing my own thing. I think because everybody knew what was going on, the boards were a little vague, and so in my brain I'm thinking like, oh, the boards are vague because they want me to go off and do my own thing, right? But that's not at all what that means.
We're so sorry.
You put so much work.
It's cool. I mean, now we're laughing at it, so it's like, it's fine now. Oh, whoa. It felt like Inception or something, and like everybody's just like doing their own thing, and I'm just so confused.
So in this film, Flamey has one simple goal, that is to deliver the candy, and that intention is going to drive every bit of his action. Like, for example, he needs to get to the door, then he probably needs to look at the door first. And basically they're just things that he needs to think and do first before he is ready for any of the action-y stuff. To be honest, it was really a back and forth process with the group and getting feedback on whether or not an action reads.
A lot of my work, this shot included, is inspired by trying to capture weighty, more accurate movement. To give some examples of some animators that inspire me are Milt Kahl, James Baxter, Hideyuki Okiura, and Mitsuo Iso. And actually, now that I go back and look at this shot, I feel like I understand why he was cut out, because the main character is more playful and fun, and I'm not sure that my animation really displays that.
Aside from the fact that Flamey is a literal ball of fire, he does have a head and body and limbs, so there are still technically models to follow. One thing I did to help with staying on model was to trace the character sheet that Michelle made several times so that I can get used to the characters and I can break it down into shapes that I'm familiar with. To be very honest, my drawings are still kind of off the character sheet, but there it is, haha. Flamey is really fun to animate because you can squash and stretch him however you want and you can do a lot of snappy animation. While animating, I kind of like to think of him as a water balloon, so something very jiggly and snappy. Man, that doesn't make sense. And if you imagine it as a water balloon, then it's easier to picture the shape that Flamey is gonna take.
Like I said before, my main role was layout artist, but as that part of my job started wrapping up and we kept on moving forward, I volunteered to do some extra work in regards to animation, where I animated the first 2 shots of the trick-or-treaters, as well as coloring one of them. So all of the people who've worked on this project have their own distinct art style and their own specific workflow. And so this was a good exercise in that, on how I had to learn how to be flexible in group projects like this. Usually I work with heavy lines and dark shading, so having to create animation without line work was an interesting challenge. It was hard early on, but I got the hang of it soon enough, and it's something that I do want to explore more in my own work.
We don't actually have a cleanup animation phase because we're doing lineless style. So the closest to cleanup we ever get is tie down, where the character is on model and the lines are pretty defined. The level of how neat we get varies among people, especially if we're gonna color our own shot after, then we don't need to worry about cleaning up our own messy line work. The biggest struggle that I had along the way was probably in the latter part where we had to redo some shots. So I had to crank out shot number 7, the one where Flamey is picking up candy and running with it, in 2 or 3 days. That was a little bit challenging, but it was really fun to just get into the grind mode and pump out the shot. Okay, I told this analogy about animating fire to my friends. It's really weird. So when you're animating fire, think of it as squeezing a toothpaste. The bulge, the thick part, is going to travel to the end and then disintegrate. I feel like the helpful thing is just to keep track of these major landmarks. And coloring is not simple as it seems, because it's the last stage before compositing, so we need to make sure the layers are organized. The flame character is colored on 3 layers: the base, facial features, and arms. We also had specific brushes for the cheeks, the fuzzy edges, and the body. So to streamline this, we had a coloring document detailing the process in both Harmony and TV Paint. When we had Jasper, an amazing human being, to help us with coloring, the document came in handy, so to resolve any confusions. Oh, also, it's much easier to do lineless in TV Paint because you can use the filled stroke tool and don't have to trace anything. This video is not sponsored by TV Paint.
Compositing is one of the last steps of the filmmaking process. It's basically where you put your film all together. You know, combine your backgrounds with your characters, with your special effects, that kind of thing. Compositing is an important part of the animation process because it's where your film really comes together. It's where you take all the puzzle pieces that you've been making so far, like your characters, your backgrounds, everything, and put it together. And it's where you put on those finishing touches. For example, if you want to make something glow, that's definitely easiest to do in a program like After Effects. We used Adobe After Effects to composite our film, which is a very versatile, very powerful program. It's also very complicated. The way it's structured is counterintuitive at times, but it's not impossible to figure out once you dig your fingers in and start messing around in there. The complexity of the compositing process varies greatly from project to project, depending on the style of the film. For us specifically, we did all of our special effects and our lighting at the compositing stage, putting in all the glowy effects on the flame, putting in shadows, putting in highlights. Yeah, so the compositing process on our film was pretty complicated. The compositing for every film is definitely not going to be this complicated. We were just aiming for a very specific style that'd be hard to achieve without using After Effects and without, doing a lot of the work in compositing. Again, it really depends on the look of the film that you're going for. The biggest struggle I faced on this project was definitely the compositing process. I basically had to learn After Effects on the fly as I was compositing the film, and it was hard and it took up so much time, but it was worth it in the end. It turned out good.
So after animation phase, we would have a flat color layer of the flame, and so during animation phase we applied some manual blurring to it with some special kind of brushes, but the key trick is we will have one layer of flat color, and then we would duplicate it and apply a bunch of directional blur and some choker effects to make it slightly smaller, so then it doesn't kind of leak out of the original silhouette. And then we will duplicate that layer again and apply the effects dissolve on it. So what this effects does is it turns the original blurred layer, and depending on the opacity of the regions, and turn it into these small particles. And when you combine all these three together, they form a really nice edge. And the key really is just to funnel with it and offset it slightly, and you will be able to choose one edge that you really want that fuzzy look to and have it in a very controlled way.
Wait, we learned so much from each other. Z, I know you how much compositing had you done before? Because you were saying how much you were learning from Janelle.
Very little.
Yeah, and Z's compositing was lit. Did you see that? Oh my god.
Okay, the way I learned how to composite is Janelle did the very first shot and then handed me the file with zero explanation, and I sat there for a day and reverse engineered what the hell Janelle had done with it. And then I composited the rest of the shots.
Look at you.
Z's very big brain.
Z's brain is so big.
And that's a fantastic technique in general. I know that in our character design class, for example, we were all taught to trace to copy other artists' work, break things down into shapes and so forth. And so you did it in a similar way. You reverse engineered the composition elements. And so then it's okay, now I know how and why this works.
Audio plays a much larger part in filmmaking than a lot of people realize. And in animation specifically, there's kind of two sides to it. There's your music, and then there's your sound design.
I made the music for this film. Though I've tinkered about in GarageBand for a while, I'm still incredibly new to Logic Pro. I also know virtually nothing about music theory and have never done a film score like this before, so this was a whole new adventure. That being said, I'm pretty proud of how it turned out. Well, seeing as I'm a music newbie, I've brought back Roy, my good friend who did the score for my LEGO partnership, and he'll explain things for you.
The primary purpose of a musical soundtrack is to serve the media it's written for. It should support and reinforce story, aesthetics, characters, and other key elements. This is the main difference between a musical soundtrack and music you'd hear on the radio. What plays on the radio is intended to be enjoyed simply for the music, whereas soundtracks on their own may not be enjoyable to listen to. However, when paired with the visual element, soundtracks elevate the experience to a new artistic level.
Thank you, Roy, for joining me here and for consulting me on the music for this project. Using suitable instruments as well as the right key is necessary to create the correct, for lack of a better word, vibe. Because Flamey starts out light and airy, I focused on cheerful notes and high-pitched instruments like glockenspiels and xylophones. I really like twinkly noises. To give slightly spookier vibes and a bass line, I introduced some horns and an organ, which also built tension for the big reveal. It was helpful to work with the sound design, so I knew where musical garnishes were more important.
Sound design is like your sound effects. For example, when the pumpkin rolls and then hits the bench, that all makes sound. There's the rolling sound, and then there's the kind of thud as it hits the bench. And then you get the little plink, plink, plink as the candy hits the ground. All of that was part of the sound design process. Sound design is important because it helps fill out the world of your animation. It really brings a lot of life to whatever is happening on screen. For our film, sound design was especially important because we had all the fire crackling, and in the last couple shots the music fades out and all we're left with is the sound of the fire. So for the last shot of the film, I think I put in like 6 or 7 layers of fire sound effects to really fill out that soundscape. And that's honestly my biggest tip for doing sound design is layer your sounds. Also, don't be afraid to mess around with things like reverb and filters to kind of get different kinds of sounds. For example, when I was putting in the trick or treat from all the kids at the beginning of the film, that was just recordings of everyone on the team saying trick or treat in a little high-pitched voice. But in order for it to sound like it was coming from behind the door, I put a filter on it to make the sound more muffled, and then I added reverb to it to make it feel like it was echoing through this large empty house. You can record your own sound effects, or you can get them online for free. There's a lot of websites that just have a bunch of free sound effects on them. It's pretty easy to use.
After the components of the film were ready, it was time for editing. This is where Z added the composited shots together, along with sound design, music, and any last-minute fade-ins in Adobe Premiere. That then gets exported and uploaded. Bow! The film is done!
Coming out, I felt like, what's it called? You know, like when pregnant women have like that depression after they have a kid.
Postpartum.
Ken, you would know.
I felt like, what am I gonna do now after I was done animating on the film?
There was like an empty feeling afterwards.
We were on a call like right after, well actually no, Anya was doing her live stream right before the film premiered, and then we all hopped on a Discord call while it was premiering, and it was a really quick film, so it happened in a flash, but we were all left with this like emptiness, but like it was like a hole in our heart. It was so sad, but it was also like really bittersweet. It felt like the last day of like performing a play, and you know it's your final performance. So doing this interview, really wholesome. I'm glad to be back with the crew.
I don't know if this was mentioned, but we're all taking a gap year due to the pandemic.
Oh my god.
So like we have nothing planned.
Yeah.
maybe something else will come out. Who knows?
I'm hoping. I
would like
great
that.
time with this.
Yeah, same. It got me to do things, and now I have a portfolio piece. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of good has come from this project in so many ways, both artistically and emotionally and friendship-wise, because I think I've gotten so much closer with all of you since. I was too much of a hermit when we were all at school together.
It's not about the it's not about the journey, it's about the friends we made on the way.
Yeah, maybe it's for real friends.
Maybe the real film was the friends we made along the way.
Yeah, that's it.
Not only was this the first time working on a team project for a lot of us, it was all organized during the pandemic.
Well, I remember like during 24-hour films and like all those other like collaborations back on campus, it was very easy to work within the same vicinity as other people. And so like if you had a question, you could just roll over to whoever you're working with and like say like, hey, do you want this or this?
Literally,
I think
roll over.
Yeah.
On the chairs. Yeah. I feel like I have trouble with communicating with people like online. So this was definitely like a good challenge on that, especially since like if I ever work outside of a studio, I'll have to be more clear in communication, and this definitely helped me like get a better grasp on that.
Agree with that.
We had a call once a week, but a week is a reasonably long time if in terms of how much progress we could make between each call. So we would be typing, and I know for me, for example, I struggle with trying to convey the right tone or explain things clearly in words. And so I believe this was a challenge for a lot of us to be effective in our communication.
Definitely.
Yeah. And also, like, when you're in person, sometimes when you don't have the right words to describe something, you can just quickly draw something out on a piece of paper. But now you don't really have that luxury. And, like, even sending in your files, to even get feedback on something little, you have to export it and do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Put it on the drive just so you can be like, hey guys, I fixed Flamey's eye. Does it look nice?
One single dot. Yeah, exactly. Another thing that proved a challenge at times was time zones. So if I'm correct, we're in 3 different time zones right now. Are we not?
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about our premiere chaos?
Oh
yeah,
my god.
Definitely. So I was like, okay, I'm going to upload this at 10 a.m. on Thursday. Brilliant, perfect. And I knew that California is 8 hours away from me. So, 6 p.m. for me, so that's 10 a.m. California time. But then I didn't take into account daylight savings, and for some reason Eastern Standard Time was like changing around at a different point. And so, Miri, didn't you like make promotional content and publish timers and everything, only for us all to discover that we've all said everything was at a different time?
I mean, like, my mistake was really dumb because I didn't just count 3 hours. I don't know. I mean, in the end, all that it cost was maybe some confusion about the premiere. The link is always the same. Thank you, YouTube, for being straightforward. But yeah, it was a little confusing. I had set the wrong timer on my Instagram, on my story, and a post I made on Tumblr to advertise had the wrong, and I had to message like 26 people.
Oh my god.
And reblocked it. And I was like, hey, this is so nice of you, and I really appreciate it, but can you delete this?
Oh my god.
Anyway.
I'm really grateful that like we were able to do this project and have some kind of shared goal during quarantine, because that really helped me, like that forced me to like maintain contact with you guys, and it forced me to like have something to look forward to every week. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for like projects like these during this pandemic.
We get to like call on Sundays, and it's kind of another way for us to connect too.
Yeah, like before this, I was kind of I was still in like quarantine purgatory schedule-wise, where all of the days just blended in together.
Yeah.
And so like this really helped me, like, okay, I need to do this by this, it's this day, this time. My life's back in track.
like people are depending on you to do things, and that really makes you want to put your shit together.
I need peer pressure to function.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know that several of you worked on other projects during this project, whether that be internships, individual projects, group projects, a job. So how did it feel balancing several things at once?
Right as we started this project, I signed up for a workshop that was 10 weeks long. It just ended yesterday. But I remember I had to ask for more time on specific parts of this project. Hey, I'm sorry, I can't get this done today. I need to focus on my workshop. And it all worked out. Everything was received on time. But I remember I was planning each day. It's okay, I'm gonna do this. And the next day I'm gonna do that. And then so on and so forth.
Janelle, I know you have an internship or a job right now?
Yeah, I just started another internship during the progress of this project, and it was pretty tiring a little bit because it ends at 6 p.m. So right after that, I just go eat dinner, and right after I eat dinner, I go work on this project. So, before this project started, I was planning to do some other personal films and stuff, but this project has gotten a lot bigger. So I just fully committed to this. On the other hand, I'm really happy that I did that. So now I have something I'm proud of that I can put on my demo reel, and I'm really happy. Whee!
So while I was working on this project, just like Janelle, I also had a daytime job to go to. But the thing is, it's not that I don't enjoy my daytime job. It's just really repetitive, and sometimes I get a little bored. And so having side projects to work on was really, really good for me because they gave me things to look forward to every day. It was kind of my break. I didn't really see it as more work to do. And yeah, really glad for that. But it was also pretty tiring. I don't think I had much personal time during October when I was in full production mode for both my independent film and still had work to do. Really, really tired, but I'm definitely taking care of myself better now.
That is good to hear. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of creators can relate to that feeling of productivity actually being boosted by having more projects to work on, because then you can alternate between one thing and the other to stop your work feeling stagnant.
And different things you learn on different productions will influence your art in general, and it's just nice to switch between things and kind of clear your mind of one project and completely shift gears to another.
Yeah, and I think on a larger scale, it's a testament to short films like the one that we made, because it means that we got a lot of elements of the pipeline done in a short span of time. We didn't get bored of spending 2 months on storyboards or something.
Yeah. Glad it was nice and fast. It's good length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was less than 2 months from start to finish. Look at us go.
A really big difference from the independent films we have to make at CalArts, where production can take anywhere from 4 to 8 months. It's 2 months. Wow.
48 hours.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah,
my
that's
God.
true.
It's funny to see us create our best work under severe pressure, but it's also kind of depressing.
Yeah.
I feel like we went the dumb ways to die route by accident with our animation. We should have done some some association of fire safety and some weird posh voice at the end.
No.
Another thing I wanted to say is that filmmaking is a bit like a marathon in that it's a really long and grueling process. So even though we invested a lot of time in the planning stage of our film, there were still a lot of uncertainties that we didn't have figured out. And I just want to say that's completely okay. And sometimes, leaving gaps can be a good thing, because as you go on, as you learn more and more techniques, your film kind of evolves, and it's nice to kind of allow for that evolution instead of rigidly sticking to one concept to the end.
Gotta agree to that, especially when we later had to change up from shot 8 to 10, like, because none of us anticipated that. We were like thinking, well, we need to reboard this, how do we do that, and get it done quickly. It's very messy at the end.
The teamwork on this project was incredible, honestly. I think a big part of that is that we're all friends, and we know each other well as people, and also we've been in school together, so we know each other as artists. And a big part of what makes a team come together is if you understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you show off each other's strengths, and you fill in for each other's weaknesses. That's how you make the best possible film.
Show your work to your peers who are not involved. Show it to your non-arty friends. Show it to people who didn't know you were doing this project, yes, because they give you vital feedback. So yeah, despite us having an incredibly clear vision of the visuals, the story was rather hectic and didn't come together until much closer to the end. In fact, some shots we had restarted after pretty much the rest of the film was finished.
One thing we could have done better as a team, and I find this is true of every project I work on, is just increased communication. From things such as letting people know if you're not going to be able to finish something on time, to just checking in and asking for feedback on whatever it is you're working on. It's really important to stay in touch with your team and communicate where exactly you're at, and ask for help if you need it, you know? The thing about working with a team is you have all these other people there to support you. So my advice is just lean on them. Let them support you.
I remember when I was animating shot 7, like, the Flamey had jumped out of the pumpkin and he was small. And then at the beginning of that was in shot 6. So then in shot 7, he got like a lot bigger. And then I was like, wait, is he supposed, like, but he was just small. Like, isn't he supposed to? And then like, it was really, I felt like really stupid because everybody in the call was like, no, he's obviously supposed to be bigger. And I'm like, wait, what?
Well, I'm so glad that Ken was on the team for that, because without that, I don't think any of us would have realized that there was this huge continuity error in the first place. As we were all winding down, Janelle did this really cute little comic panel thing of some memorable, wacky moments throughout, and I think that it perfectly summarizes the stupidity and the wonderfulness, that's a word, the greatness, I don't know, that came from this film. Like, one of the moments from me was, my voice is the screams that you hear at the end of the film, and so I needed to record them, all 3 of them. And I wanted it to sound like it was coming from outside, so I went out into the vegetable garden at night, recorded it, and I live in the middle of nowhere. No one is near me, but it was so embarrassing. I could not scream.
You should show the rock.
Roll clip.
Fire! Oh no!
This is so awkward.
Well, as highlighted in Janelle's little comic thing, my whole debacle or whatever with the time zones was fun. Fun.
Who's the one in the middle?
Oh my god.
The one in the middle?
That's you.
Wait, that's me?
Wait, you didn't
The Japanese one.
like a joke.
Was I speaking Japanese?
Yes.
Oh.
Wait, what does it say? The Japanese.
I mean, in the panel, it just says Sakuga and then under there it says Omae wa mou shinderu.
Yeah, I do say that sometimes.
I does.
I know that something I personally loved was the moment that Ken was added to the group. Suddenly everything was gaining realistic hands and feet.
Oh my god.
We have some seriously cursed images of Flamey.
My favorite part of the process was probably coming up with the pipeline test to develop the fuzzy look.
One of my favorite moments was the first week of visual development. And what made it especially fun was that we got to do our own thing. So it was really cool seeing how different our interpretations of the same concept looked like.
My favorite part of the process was absolutely getting to work with these incredible people that I'm very lucky to call my classmates.
I hope this has been an informative video. Thank you again to all my friends for taking part. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I make a variety of art-related content and hope to bring my pals in more often. Whilst you're down there, why not leave a comment and follow my talented teammates, please? I'm truly honoured to know these artists and I promise you won't regret following their work. It's all linked in the description. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
again.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.